look at the close and the now, and then we're going to take a big step back and look at the bigger picture in terms of deglobalization, depopulation, inflation, everything that's going on with the world. If you're looking for why the supply chains are all messed up, in a word, it is COVID. Now, what has happened is that when we went into lockdown, we changed the way we can consume. In a modern economy, somewhere between 60 and 75% of our consumption are services. Going to college, going on vacation, getting your hair cut, going to a restaurant. That just stopped. And we started consuming goods instead. And unlike services, goods have supply chains. And we didn't just go to goods, we went to specific kinds of goods. For our first few months and weeks of lockdown, nobody wanted to buy a car because no one was driving anywhere. So it became all electronics all the time. Our demand patterns whiplashed, and supply chains had to rework themselves all the way back to the mines in order to meet our changed demand profile. Now, by the time we got to June of 2020, we had enough of the vaccine for everyone. Demand patterns started shifting into something that could have been our new normal. Chip manufacturers, the manufacturers of everything, started to get to a more traditional supply chain system. But then the bottom fell out. Anti-vaxxers boiled up, Delta came in from the cold and changed all the rules, and so we're whiplashing back and forth, we have been for months, between openings, between closings, getting new vaccine policies and new lockdown policies and new openings, and every single time our consumption pattern changes with it. With each whipsaw, industry reset to whatever the demand profile was at the time. And every time we had a reset, we basically needed a year in order for everything to work its way through. We will not get a final reset this year because it's not just about us. Also about how the Asians manufacture products in the age of COVID. Now, most of the East Asian states to this point have had what they call a zero-tolerance approach to COVID. They have one case in an area, the entire region, the entire city, the entire province, whatever it happens to be, goes into a degree of lockdown. It sounds rough. It is rough, but to this point, it has meant that most of the Asian states have been relatively unaffected by COVID from a disease point of view most of the time. And that has been great for us in Anglo-America, because if you don't have a disease profile to worry about, you can easily melon scoop out exemptions for individual facilities that say do manufacturing. So despite all the raging chaos in Canadian and American demand patterns, the East Asians, by and large, could at least attempt to retool to whatever version of consumption we had. Well, that period is ending. The Asians have experienced 3, in some cases 6 lockdowns. Zero tolerance worked for a while, but they just can't afford doing it anymore. And that was before Delta, with its extreme communicability, came in on the scene. And now we've got Omicron, which is even worse. And it's not just about the economics and the genomics. It's politically, this has gotten really tiring, and a lot of us are just done. So in bits and pieces, inconsistently, sometimes 2 steps forward, 2 steps back, Asia is opening up. And while this is allowing them to get back to some version of normal economic activity and consumption, it also means that they're now in the worst position for manufacturing. Because before, if you had few cases, you could always have your manufacturing operate. But if cases are creeping in from the sides, now facility closures are far more common than they ever were in the height of Alpha or Delta or the original wild strain out of Wuhan. And this is going to last until such time as we have a vaccine protocol that provides 90% vaccination 90% protection against symptoms for whatever the variant of the moment happens to be today. That's Omicron. In the best case scenario, we're not even going to have that formula until April of this year. And you're talking at least a year to get into mass manufacturing and inoculate everybody. So in short, Delta, Omicron, the anti-vaxxers, collectively, they've pushed back the recovery of our supply chain system from roughly the 3rd quarter of last year to at least the 2nd quarter of next year. And that assumes nothing else goes wrong. Let's talk transport. On the left, you of course have the Vancouver port, and on the right, you have Long Beach and Los Angeles. Same port, weird name. Now, Vancouver, you might expect from its position as Canada's primary West Coast port that it does a little bit of everything. Containers, bulk, energy, a little bit of everything. That's actually really odd these days. In today's globalized system, every port is unique because ports have become specialized. Everybody does their own thing. So in the United States, Tacoma does commodities, New York does oil, Long Beach is our container port. And not just any container port. It handles the biggest ships that we are capable of floating as a species, the ones that can have 10, 15,000 containers at a time. Now, what has happened with COVID is we've gone from services to goods and from goods to electronics specifically. Well, all the electronics and all the computing products come from East Asia. And they're put into containers. And they come to Los Angeles and Vancouver, the only two ports on the East Coast that can really handle them in scale. And so we get lines of ships out in the ocean waiting for their turn. Both ports have about a 6-week backlog right now. That costs time, that costs money. Nor are there any good container ship alternatives. I mean, that's obvious for Canada. St. John's is a long way away. But even in the United States, the closest ports that could handle some of this traffic are Houston and Savannah. That's on the wrong side of the Panama Canal. And for every week that it takes to get the products there, and every week it takes for them to ship west across North America to get to where it was supposed to go, that's time on a chassis, that's time with a truck, that's time with a driver that it didn't have to be before. So even if you can clear up some of the port problems, you're still going to have it throughout the truck and the train system. As a result, container costs have gone up by roughly a factor of 5. We should not expect that to come down anytime soon. And at least in the case of the United States, this is our new norm. But even if we could just magically wave a wand and build in 6 months a port that normally would take 12 years, there's another problem, and that's the Chinese. China has never been a capitalist-driven system. It has always been centrally driven. And what has happened in the first term of the Xi administration is he's basically turned China from an authoritarian, bureaucratic-led system to a full cult of personality. He has so prosecuted his political and his economic foes that there are very few people left in China that have not been imprisoned, intimidated into silence, exiled, or killed. Now, this takes us a lot of different directions, none of which are comfortable. He started going after private business for whatever idea crosses his mind, which is chilled private investment in technology, anything with a foreign connection. The Chinese are now ideologically indoctrinating students. The last time we saw this was in the late Soviet period where they ran out of money. And so instead of giving people technical training, they gave them ideological training, which hurts the Russian workforce to this day. And Xi has personally shot the messenger so many times, sometimes literally.